Ethan had always liked quiet places. After long days working on the ranch, he often walked to the river where the water moved slow and steady. It was the one place where he felt he could breathe without hurry. On that morning, the sun was warm, the wind soft, and everything felt peaceful. He carried a small fishing line, a tin of bait, and a worn coat tied to his saddle. Nothing seemed unusual until he heard the sound that made him stop. At first, it was only a splash, quick, sharp, and heavy. Ethan frowned. The sound was too strong to be a fish jumping. He waited, thinking maybe a branch had fallen in the water. But then he heard it again. Louder this time, followed by a muffled cry. His heart kicked against his ribs. That was a human voice. Someone was struggling. He ran toward the riverbank, boots sliding on loose stones. When he reached the edge, he saw her. A young Apache girl was trapped in the middle of the river, caught by the strong current that rushed around a bend. Her arms were flailing wildly, her long dark hair stuck to her face as she tried to stay above the water. She gasped for air, eyes wide with terror, barely managing to keep her head from going under. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dropped his fishing rod and ran straight into the cold water. The shock of the icy current tightened his muscles, but he pushed forward with all his strength. The river was deeper than it looked, and the current pulled hard at his legs, threatening to drag him downstream. But the girl's desperate cry drove him on. He reached out, grabbed her arm, and anchored himself with his other hand against a submerged rock. "Hold on to me," he shouted, though the rushing water almost stole his voice. Her fingers clung to him with surprising strength, as if life itself rested in that grip. He pulled her closer, inch by inch, until he could lift her into his arms. She was shaking from cold and fear. Slowly, with careful steps, he made his way back toward the shore. When he finally reached solid ground, he lowered her gently onto the grass. She coughed hard, choking out river water as she tried to breathe normally. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face so she wouldn't inhale it. Her skin was pale from shock, and her lips trembled. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now." The girl opened her eyes and looked up at him. There was fear in them, but also confusion, maybe even disbelief. She seemed unsure whether she should trust him or run. Ethan didn't move any closer. He wanted her to feel safe, not trapped. After a few minutes, she whispered her name. Her voice was quiet and shaky, but it carried strength hidden underneath. Ethan nodded gently. "I'm Ethan," he said. "You took a bad fall. The river has strong currents here." She didn't answer right away. She kept staring at him like she was trying to understand why he had helped her. Ethan knew people from her tribe often stayed away from ranchers and townsfolk. There had been tension between groups for years, and many avoided each other. But none of that mattered to Ethan in the moment he saw her drowning. A person needed help. That was all. Nayeli tried to sit up, but her legs buckled, and she winced in pain. Ethan quickly took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked surprised by the gesture, as though she wasn't used to someone offering comfort so openly. "You're cold," he said. "Rest a bit. The shaking will stop soon." She held the coat tightly, pulling it around her chest as if it were a shield. For a long moment, she simply watched him. Her eyes were dark and deep, showing both fear and gratitude. Finally, she spoke in a small voice. "I was gathering herbs. I slipped." Ethan nodded. The rocks near the river were slick. Anyone could have fallen. "Do you live far from here?" Nayeli hesitated. Her gaze shifted to the trees behind them, almost like she was expecting someone to appear. She shook her head slowly, then looked back at Ethan. "I should not go home yet." "Why?" he asked gently. Her hands tightened around the coat. "I wandered too far. My uncle will be angry." Ethan didn't press her. Her fear was real. He could see it in the way her shoulders curled slightly inward, and how she kept glancing toward the forest path. Maybe she had grown up with strict expectations, maybe even unfair ones. "You can rest at my camp," Ethan said quietly. "It's close by, just until your strength comes back." She looked at him again, searching his face for any sign of danger or dishonesty. When she found none, she slowly nodded. He helped her stand, supporting her carefully so she wouldn't fall again. Her legs were still weak, but she leaned on him just enough to walk. His camp wasn't far, just a small spot with a fire pit, a canvas sheet for shade, and a simple cooking setup. Ethan guided her to the softest patch of ground. She sat down, still wrapped in his coat, and watched everything like it was unfamiliar territory. Ethan prepared a small meal, roasting fish he had caught earlier. The warm smell drifted through the air. Nayeli's stomach growled quietly, and she lowered her head in embarrassment. Ethan pretended not to notice, placing the food near her without a word. "You need to eat. It will help warm you up." After a moment of hesitation, she took the plate. She ate slowly at first, testing trust with each bite. Then, hunger overcame her caution, and she ate more confidently. Every so often, she lifted her gaze to him, as if still unsure why he was being kind. As the sun dipped lower, turning the sky orange, a deeper silence settled between them. Nayeli looked toward the river, shivering at the memory of the struggle. Ethan noticed. "You're safe here," he said again. She nodded, but he could tell the fear hadn't fully left her. He added wood to the fire to chase away the chill. The warmth seemed to calm her. Yet something else lingered, something he didn't understand yet. As evening grew darker, Nayeli moved closer to the fire, then a little closer to Ethan, almost without thinking. She didn't sit beside him directly, but she stayed near enough that she could see him clearly. Every time a breeze rustled the leaves or the fire crackled too loudly, she glanced at him for reassurance. Ethan didn't mind. He understood fear. He understood needing someone nearby after a frightening moment. When the night finally grew quiet, Nayeli spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people say that if someone saves your life, you must stay near them until the debt is paid." Ethan blinked in surprise. "You don't owe me anything." But she shook her head, firm for the first time since he rescued her. There was strength in her eyes now, a strength that had been hidden under fear. "I will not leave your side until I repay you," she said softly. "This is my promise." Ethan felt a small chill not from the night air, but from the weight of her words. He didn't know exactly what it meant in her culture or how serious it was, but he could sense the depth behind it. Nayeli pulled his coat closer around herself and looked at him with quiet determination. The river had taken her strength, but this promise seemed to give some of it back. Ethan stared at the fire, wondering how much his day had changed in only a few hours. He had gone out seeking peace and returned with a responsibility he never expected. Nayeli stayed close, watching him like he was the only steady thing left in her world. And the truth was, right now, he was. The next morning came softly. A cool mist hung above the river, and the sun rose slowly through the pale sky. Ethan woke early, as he always did. But this time, he was surprised to see Nayeli already awake. She was sitting by the dying fire, wrapped in his coat, watching him with calm, steady eyes. It was as if she had been waiting. When he sat up, she stood quickly and moved toward him, almost like she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away for too long. It took him a moment to understand just how seriously she had meant her promise. "You don't have to follow me everywhere," he said gently. But Nayeli lowered her head and shook it. "I stay until the debt is paid." Ethan sighed softly. Not out of frustration but concern. He wasn't sure what paying a debt meant in her culture, and he didn't want her to feel trapped, especially after what she had gone through. "I didn't save you because I wanted something," he said. "Anyone would have helped." She lifted her gaze slowly. Not everyone helps. Many look away. Those words carried a heavy truth he didn't fully understand, but the sadness in her eyes made his chest tighten. He didn't argue again. Instead, he prepared the small morning meal, and she stayed close to him, handing him things he needed without being asked: firewood, herbs, the small pot for boiling water. She moved quietly, watching his actions and mirroring them when she could. After they ate, Ethan packed up the camp. He had planned to check fence lines and ride out further into the grazing fields that day. But he didn't know what to do with Nayeli. She watched him with expectation in her expression, waiting for him to lead. "You can rest here," he suggested. "I'll be back later." She shook her head again, firm this time. "Where you go, I go." He stood still for a moment. There was no fear in her voice anymore, only certainty. Ethan realized that for her, staying by his side wasn't a burden. It was a duty. Maybe even an honor. And she seemed calmer when she was near him, as if his presence kept the world steady. "All right," he said softly. "But if you get tired, tell me." Nayeli nodded, and they began walking together. Ethan led the way across the open land, where tall grass swayed under the morning wind. Nayeli walked a few steps behind him, silent and observant. Every now and then, she would glance around cautiously, as if listening for something only she could hear. They reached the fence line, and Ethan began working, tightening loose wire and fixing posts the last storm had knocked down. Nayeli crouched nearby, watching his hands closely. When she finally felt brave enough, she helped by holding the posts steady. Her movements were careful, almost delicate, but full of effort. Ethan noticed she was trying hard to be useful. "You're doing well," he said, offering a small smile. Her expression brightened, and something soft flickered across her face, something that looked like pride. As the day warmed, they continued their work. Ethan didn't talk much, but Nayeli didn't seem to need many words. She stayed close enough to help, far enough to give him room. Whenever he glanced her way, she looked back with the same calm, steady loyalty she had shown since the rescue. But in the afternoon, the weather changed. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and a cold wind swept across the field. Thunder rumbled far away, low and threatening. Nayeli froze instantly. Her hands tightened around her coat, and she stepped closer to Ethan. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Her voice trembled. "Storms. I do not like storms." A sharp crack of thunder followed, louder this time, and she flinched as if struck. Without thinking, she moved right beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his sleeve. Ethan spoke gently, calming her the best he could. They took shelter under a rocky overhang as rain began to fall. Inside the shelter, the space was small, and Nayeli stayed pressed to his side, her breaths shallow and uneven. Ethan didn't touch her, but he stayed still, letting her feel safe, because he understood fear. Maybe not the same kind she carried, but fear was fear. "It will pass soon," he said. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. Another thunderclap made her gasp. For a moment, she looked much younger, almost fragile, and Ethan realized she wasn't only afraid of the storm. Fear lived deeper inside her, shaped by memories he hadn't heard yet. When the rain finally faded and the sky lightened, Nayeli relaxed slowly. She stepped back, embarrassed, but Ethan shook his head. "You don't need to apologize," he said gently. She looked at him with deep gratitude, as if his understanding meant more than anything else. They continued walking toward the river clearing when they saw movement in the trees. 2 Apache scouts rode out on horseback, their faces stern and serious. Nayeli stiffened so suddenly that Ethan felt the shift in the air. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing quickened, and fear returned to her eyes. The scouts approached, speaking in their own language first. Ethan didn't understand the words, but Nayeli did. She stepped behind him, hiding like someone trying to escape a shadow. One scout pointed at Nayeli with a questioning look, then at the river behind them. Ethan realized they had been searching for her. "She's safe," Ethan said calmly, raising a hand. "She fell in the river. She needed help." The scouts exchanged a look. One of them nodded slowly, but the other frowned, clearly upset about something. He spoke to Nayeli again, sharper this time, and she flinched. Ethan didn't move aggressively, but he stepped slightly in front of her. "She's still recovering. Let her rest." The two scouts paused. They weren't expecting resistance, especially not from someone outside their people. But Ethan's calm firmness made them reconsider. After a moment, they nodded, and one of them said a word that sounded like gratitude. Then, they turned their horses and rode off, disappearing into the trees. As soon as they were gone, Nayeli let out a shaky breath and sat on the ground. She looked overwhelmed, as if she had been carrying fear for far too long. "They think I always cause trouble," she whispered. "If I return alone, they will be angry. If I return weak, they will be disappointed." Ethan crouched beside her. "You survived a river current. That makes you strong." She blinked, surprised by his words, as though no one had ever called her strong before. Ethan offered his hand. "Let's go back together." Nayeli looked at his hand, then up at his face. Trust won over fear. She placed her hand in his. They walked side by side through the quiet forest. As they neared her village, the sounds of daily life drifted toward them. Children running, women gathering food, men preparing tools. Nayeli slowed, uncertainty rising again. "You can do this," Ethan said softly. She stood straighter, a small spark of courage lighting inside her. They walked into the village together. People stared, surprised to see her with him. The elders came forward, asking what had happened. Nayeli did not hide behind Ethan this time. She stepped forward, lifted her chin, and told the story clearly. She explained the fall, the rescue, and how Ethan had shown kindness without expecting anything. The elders listened and nodded with approval. Ethan gave a small bow and turned to leave, thinking his part in her story was finished. But Nayeli stopped him with a soft voice. He turned, meeting her eyes. She walked up to him, her expression full of quiet courage. "I said I would not leave your side because of a debt," she said. "But now, it is not a debt." Ethan waited, unsure of what she meant. "I feel safe with you," she continued. "And I choose to walk with you, not because I must, but because I want to." For the first time since he met her, Nayeli smiled a soft, honest smile that lit her face gently. Ethan felt something warm settle in his chest. He nodded slowly. "Then you're welcome to walk beside me," he said. Together, they stepped away from the village edge. Nayeli walked not behind him this time, but beside him, her head high, her steps steady, her fear replaced with trust. And from that day on, she remained close, not because of a promise made beside a river, but because the world felt far less frightening with Ethan at her side.